now it's time for the real news. Here's Farron.
Hello and welcome to The Real News. This is your weekly call-in program where we discuss current events and politics. Today our guest is going to be James Fetzer, professor, author, filmmaker. We will begin our discussion of 9/11, the facts and the fiction. And after the guest, we will go to the phones and take your phone calls. There's been so much that's happened in the past week, so let's go ahead and get started and start with some news. Areas of a town in Arkansas have been placed under a 24-hour nonstop curfew described by the mayor as almost akin to martial law. The lockdown, issued after a spat of robberies, home invasions, and shooting, applies to everyone in Helena, West Helena, Arkansas, no matter what age or what time of day it is. Mayor James Valley has indicated that the curfew could be extended indefinitely. Residents have described the lockdown as like being in jail, and critics have slammed it as unconstitutional given that it effectively suspends the Fourth Amendment. The ACLU of Arkansas has sent Mayor Valley a letter outlining these concerns. Imposing house arrest and suspending the Fourth Amendment for law-abiding people is only going to cause more problems for the city, said ACLU of Arkansas staff attorney Holly Dixon. They need to work with the community to get this resolved instead of treating all their citizens like criminals. Such domestic surges with police imposing martial law style clampdown are now seemingly becoming standard procedure. I am saddened to report today that our country has become so violent, so murderous in some areas that the police are going into martial law scenarios in certain areas. Not only is this a very strong sign of the times, but it is the incrementalism of legitimizing martial law in America on larger and larger scales. This is a disturbing sign of how much in decline our society is, and if our economic situation continues to decline, we will have much more crime and therefore more reasons for the government to justify their use of militarized police, lockdown, curfews, and decimating our constitutional rights. And that's happening not only in Arkansas but in another city in America, and it's went by far unreported by the mainstream press. Also this past week, Israel-Iran war not okayed by the U.S. Israel's defense minister says the regime has not received approval from the U.S. to carry out a strike against Iran's nuclear sites. The Americans are not ready to allow us to attack Iran, said Edmund Barak told Army Radio on Wednesday. Our position is that no option is taken off the table, but in the meantime, we have to make diplomatic progress, he added. Israel, which is widely believed to have over 200 ready-to-use atomic warheads, says Iran's nuclear program is a main strategic threat, although the UN nuclear watchdog has confirmed that Tehran's uranium enrichment activities are within the limits of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Brock's comments follow reports about an armada of U.S. naval battle groups heading toward the Persian Gulf with the aim of reinforcing U.S. strike forces in the region. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, the USS Ronald Reagan, the USS Iwo Jima are sailing toward the Persian Gulf accompanied by the British Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and the French nuclear hunter-killer submarine. The deployment comes almost a week after Operation Brimstone, which was conducted by the U.S., British, and French naval forces in the Atlantic Ocean. Apparently, the 12 warships taking part in the war games are preparing for a possible confrontation with Iran. This went widely unreported, and now war has broke out between Georgia and Russia. Russia seems to not care what the supposed lone superpower has to say. Russia continued attacking, supposedly after the ceasefire. We're amassing our navy in the Persian Gulf, rattling the sabers of war very strongly against a country that hasn't attacked us or anyone else, and although our own intelligence and that of the UN has reported that they are 6 to 10 years from having the bomb, we seem determined to force this calamity. All the while, a real possibility of outbreak of war involving Russia is at hand. I think we should all take a long pause and think, after our troops have been in battle for 5 years in 2 countries, extending troop deployments over and over, is it wise for the world's largest debtor nation that can't finance the war with Iraq without borrowing billions per week from China to enter into another war of aggression, attacking a country unprovoked? We better get ready. Russia is flexing its might. World opinion of the U.S. is at an all-time low, and I personally think the world has had a bellyful of our arrogance and our hypocrisy. And we're going to go to Brian at this time. What you got for us today, Brian?
On January 17, 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower would give his farewell address to the nation. Eisenhower would utilize the opportunity to warn the American people of the grave threat and implications that the military-industrial complex posed to peace and liberty. In stark contrast to practically all other presidential farewell addresses, Eisenhower did not go into the standard how great he was leaving the country speech, but speaking directly to the American people, warning them of potential ramifications of the massive military armaments establishment and potential for disastrous consequences of such ingrained and powerful influence. Eisenhower once said, "God help this country if someone sits in this chair that doesn't understand the military like I do." Here, 47 years later, many of Eisenhower's worst fears have come to fruition, a state of perpetual war with no prospect of ever ending. The military-industrial complex now has their open-ended war, and with it, the accompanying blank check. Trillions have already been spent on the war on terrorism. Major U.S. firms like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and the Carlyle Group making fortunes from death and destruction. The idea of perpetual war has become as American as apple pie, making a killing from killing.
Eisenhower now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
That was the last speech that President Eisenhower gave, and I think it's a very telling speech. A lot of people have never heard it before, but you can go to YouTube and you can find it. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come back with our interview with James Fetzer, WSIC 1400, WDSL 1520.